Hi, and welcome to my FlossTube channel. I'm Jean Farish, and I'm so glad that you're here with me today. We're going to talk about two projects today. I'm going to kind of focus on two things that are kind of rolling around in my head. One of them is the stitch-along project that I have for the Redwoods, Rails, and Winery trip. I don't know why that phrase just always wants to trip me up. But at any rate, it's going to be a fun trip. This is going to start mid-October, like October 15th. And we're going to start in San Francisco and travel through all the way to the wine country and back and see a whole bunch of different things and get to stitch and just spend time with our tribe, so to speak. So I was going to adapt one of my existing projects to work for that stitch-along. And I have since decided that the trip deserves its own piece. And I've got some ideas and I've pulled colors that I want to use for that. And so this will be yet another one in the series of what I call my ampersand samplers. I've got the bison and elk, the bear and the moose, the deer and the grapes, and the hare in the basket. So I have 4 so far. So thinking about doing yet another one in that series. I already have the quote decided. It's going to be one of the John Muir quotes. And so what I did, again, just to give you a little bit of the background of how I go about this type of a design process. In this case, because it's part of a grouping, not that you have to do them all, and not even necessarily that I hang them all together, but because it's part of a series, the first thing I did was I pulled all the colors that have been used in the 4 existing ones. And then from that, I pulled out the color scheme that I want to use for this yet unnamed sampler. When I look at the full range of all the colors that have been used in all of the ampersand samplers, I'm sort of surprised and not surprised. The very first one was designed 30 years ago. And the second one, I want to say 7 or 8 years ago. So when I think about the compatibility of these colors over that span of time, I'm kind of surprised. Where I'm not surprised is, just like everybody, each designer kind of has their colorway. They have the scheme or the colors that they tend to gravitate toward. And so in that regard, I'm not surprised that there is some continuity and that I could pull any 15 or 20 colors within this full range and come up with a pretty good color scheme. So that's where I always start. And then the next thing that I will do is to keep it the same size and shape as the others in the series. I'll probably use the same stitches, which is primarily cross stitch, a little bit of back stitch for the quote, and some herringbone stitch. Some of them also have the long arm cross stitch in them, so that's kind of up for grabs. And then I have started kind of a thing where I don't have the same motifs in all of them, but there's some motifs that are repeated between them. So I will probably pull a couple of them out, not any of the major ones, but kind of the minor players, and repeat those in the new design, and then come up with my 2 stars. So I have to do a little bit of research as far as the places that we're going to be seeing. I mean, I know where we're going. I don't need to research that part of it. But I want to pull out some icons, some images that we think of with those regions, again, from San Francisco to Napa in that range. So that's kind of how I'm going to be approaching that, and I will share that progress with you as I'm going along. In fact, what I'm hoping to do over the next couple of weeks is to do a daily update on my Facebook page as far as where I am. Do that. So that's one big thing. The other thing I want to talk to you about is the kindness sampler. Now, when I first started talking about this a couple weeks ago, I guess, I shared with you that there was some damage from a previous framing job of some pretty serious stains from the tape that was used. Now, there's still a little bit of damage in the corners and whatnot, but I'm going to show you this image of the two side by side. The photograph I took right before this process that I used to try to remove the stains and how it looks now. And you are, I mean, I'm pleasantly surprised. So the photograph I took right before this process that I used to try to remove the stains and how it looks now. And you are, I mean, I'm pleasantly surprised, downright amazed that I was able to get as much of it out as I did. But I also want to explain to you why it was taped, why I think it was taped. I don't, again, it was so long ago, I don't remember why that framer did what they did. So a piece that's this small without a lot of fabric around it, it's very easy to say, well, you know, let's tape it down to a bigger board and just call it a day. But even when your piece is small and you decide that you want to use a mat, you don't have to do that. And I'm gonna show you why. This is actually a mat, a double mat with what's referred to as a fillet that I had made for a totally different project. So this project, in fact, I should probably measure this real fast. Hold on a second, let me get my ruler. Okay, so yeah, I was thinking that this is about 8 inches square. So the piece that I had framed in here, I knew that this is about, actually that opening is 7 inches. So what I did though was I mounted it on an 8-inch piece of foam board, which then sits down into this channel. Let me do a close-up so you can see a little bit better. And I use this method on almost all of my pieces. So basically, here, let me change this out a little bit. Get rid of this. Put the black background there. Okay, so you can see a little bit better. So the black, this is the frame, that's the mat opening. And so the mat board fits down into this channel. And that shadow is kind of making it hard. And probably easier to see over here. So the mounted piece of needlework fits down into this channel. And what the framer does is, in this case, I know it was a guy, he built out with other pieces of foam, acid-free foam board to make up the difference. So why do it like that? Well, there's really two reasons. One of them is a cost saving for the stitcher. I'm going to do some computation and kind of edit it back in after I have time to think about it. As far as exactly the difference between if I had my piece of needlework that's just going to show in this opening, or the same design if I did the entire thing. What would be the difference in what I would spend on my linen between those two ways of framing? This is why it bothers me when people talk about that you have to add 3 inches all the way around your piece. You don't always have to do that. And if you are thinking about using a mat and saying, well, my piece is going to be this big that I want to show in my mat opening, and then I need another 2.5 or 3 inches that's going to be covered up by the mat, plus another inch to wrap it around the foam cord, that's a lot of fabric. And depending on the piece, you could be easily doubling the size of the linen that you need for that. So that's one reason I do it, is just pure frugality. The other thing is, by setting it up like this, when you go to pin your needlework, if you don't have it exactly centered, it will be okay. Your framer should be able to center it in the mat opening, and then to build the extra pieces around it, mainly there just to secure it, so it's, you know, obviously not floating around. So now, to be clear, if it's not centered, but it's pinned straight, you still have to get it straight, you know, lined up evenly on the sides and the top and the bottom, then you'll be okay. But let's say even if you were off by ½ of an inch, a good framer should still be able to center that piece of needlework in the mat opening, and then again, build with the extra pieces around the outside. So that's something I wanted to share with you. So a piece like this, if I still want to add a mat to it, I can still do that by using this other method. Let's start with a design area of 5 inches by 5 inches. So that's the area that's actually stitched. Now I don't want my mat to be right up against my stitched area. I want about 1 inch on all sides. So the area to show in the mat opening is going to be 7 by 7. I need to cut the foam board 8 inches by 8 inches. And I'm going to need some fabric to wrap around the edge of the foam board. So I need to cut my fabric 10 by 10. That gives me a total fabric size of 100 square inches. Now let's use the exact same design area. The area that's stitched is 5 inches by 5 inches. My mat opening is still 7 by 7. If my fabric is going to be completely behind the mat, then I need to look at the total mat size of 12 inches by 12 inches. Again, I'm going to need 1 inch to wrap around the foam board, so I need to cut my fabric 14 by 14. That means my total square inches for this project is 196 square inches. That means my fabric is twice as large and twice as expensive. So now I want to show you how I got rid of the majority of the damage done by the way it was taped down previously. Again, you know, obviously since this has 2000 on it, 21 years ago. So it doesn't take a century for this discoloration to take place. So I'm going to show you what that method is, and then I'm going to come back and talk about the next steps. So here we go. This is what I'm using here, Retro Clean. And I have used it before on some vintage textiles, and I have been very impressed with how much of the yellowing due to age that it has been able to remove. So let's take a look at the directions on the back. So what it's telling me is that, first of all, you should check for color fastness first, which I have done. And using 3 to 4 tablespoons in each gallon of warm water. Now, I certainly don't even need a gallon for a piece this small. So I'm just going to use a quart. So I'm just going to use 1 tablespoon in a quart of warm water. At this point, I just have 2 pints of warm water in here, and I want to get the granules good and dissolved before I add more water. I can add a cooler temperature water to dilute it further, but I want to start with really warm water to make sure all those granules get dissolved. It can't do its work if it's not dissolved. So now I'm going to add cool water just to bring the temperature down a little bit. And of course you want to make sure that the piece is good and submerged in the basin. So I'm going to let this soak for a couple of hours, and do a couple of other things and then come back and see what kind of shape we're in. I think you can see that the color of the water has turned. I'm looking at both the water in the basin and what's on my screen. It's a little bit more yellow-green in real life than what we're seeing here. But it does look like the color where the tape was may be diminished. But it kind of feels like the residue still might be there. So let's take a closer look. So I have it on this terry towel just to get some of the water out. And I can see I was a little bit optimistic. Not as much of the color is gone as I thought. So let's take a look and see if I can get some of the residue off. So I'm just going to use a clean but old toothbrush here and just kind of rub it in the various areas. I can be pretty brusque with this because there's no stitching. And again, linen is a very sturdy fabric. It's made from some of the strongest fibers that we cultivate from the flax plant. Well, I really won't be sure until it dries, but it does look like that it's not anywhere near as discolored as it was. But what I'm going to do now is let it soak for another couple hours and see what happens. Okay, we'll see how it looks after the second soak here. Just blotting it enough to get the worst of the drips out. This part's looking pretty good. I think it's hard to tell until it's really dry as far as the color is concerned. I think it's important to try to attack the adhesive from both sides of the fabric. Mainly I'm concerned with the top because I've got the least amount of distance here for framing. And I can tell that there's still quite a bit of yellowing across the top here. And I probably should have made note of the fact that the second soaking, the water is almost clear compared to how it was after that first soaking. So let's take a look again at the side-by-side comparison. On the left is the photo I took before I started this process. And on the right is after I have soaked it twice, let it dry a little bit, ironed it face down on the terry towels, and we can see on the right how much better it looks. Now, of course, I did not iron it until I was finished doing all the soaking. So I've had a piece of mat board already cut for this design, and I will be centering it on here. Now, in this case, again, let me change background so that you can see this better. I haven't quite decided whether or not I'm going to have a mat on this. So in this case, I am going to be very, very careful to get this as perfectly centered as possible. So my next step is going to be to baste an outline that is in the groove, that is between two designated or predetermined linen threads all the way around. And then I will use that as my guide for pinning this. And then that way I know that I'm getting it perfectly straight in terms of the way it's lined up, so that wherever I decide to frame it or pin it, that linen thread is perfectly straight all the way down the length of it. And so that's the other thing too. If this is slightly out of kilter, you can see where, you know, there's still some give to it. So I can easily straighten that out so it will be perfectly centered and perfectly straight on this piece of mat board. So that's my next step. So that's pretty much a wrap today. We only talked about the two projects, the kindness sampler, which I'll be teaching on the 2 road trips this fall, and the yet unnamed ampersand sampler. That's going to be the stitch along project for the redwoods. So not a whole lot of content this week, but I hope that it's had some entertainment value, or that you've learned something from it, and that wherever you are stitching happy and staying safe. I'll see you next week.